Some rather unexpected details have emerged from today's conversation between Emmanuel Macron and Vladimir Putin. And they are not about Russia's war against Ukraine, but about Putin's attempts to regain at least some of Moscow's influence in the Middle East against the backdrop of United States and Israeli attacks on Iran. Moreover, there is evidence that it was the Kremlin, not Macron's office, that initiated the call. Although the Kremlin claimed that, regarding the topic of Russia's war against Ukraine, Putin sternly told Macron that the West was to blame for this war. And Macron tried to convince the Kremlin dictator that he should cease fire because the very same West is not going to stop helping Ukraine. Still, the main topic of the conversation was the Middle East. And it's important to consider this aspect in light of the fact that Macron's position on Iran and Israel is not as clear-cut as, for example, Donald Trump's. And dictator Putin is now trying to take advantage of this as the Kremlin is catastrophically losing its position in the Middle East after the United States strike on Iran. And after Trump simply dismissed Putin when he offered his help in negotiations with Tehran. My name is Alexei Pichi. Next, more details on everything. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link is in the video description. So let's go through everything step by step. The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin had a phone conversation with the president of France, Emmanuel Macron. The Kremlin's press service was the first to report this, without disclosing who initiated the conversation. And this is the first telling detail, because when Western leaders were the ones to initiate, the Kremlin, on the contrary, tried to make it public. Like, look, they are the ones calling our president. But not now. I'll explain later why it's crucial. For the leaders of the two countries, this is the first direct contact since September 2022. And so, according to the Kremlin statement, the heads of state discussed the situation in the Middle East. According to the Kremlin, Putin and Macron emphasized the importance of respecting Tehran's legitimate right to develop peaceful nuclear energy and to continue fulfilling its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, including cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is the second key point, which we'll revisit later. Please bear with me. According to the Kremlin's press release, the parties discussed Russia's war against Ukraine. Putin once again called the armed conflict a direct consequence of the policies of Western countries, which, according to him, have allegedly ignored Russia's security interests for many years. They created an anti-Russian foothold in Ukraine and condoned violations of the rights of Russian-speaking residents. In addition, Putin accused the West of prolonging the hostilities by supplying the Kyiv regime with various modern weapons. Speaking about the prospects for a peaceful settlement in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin confirmed the fundamental approaches to possible agreements, which, in his opinion, should provide for the elimination of the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis and be based on the new territorial realities, according to the Kremlin. Macron, in turn, called on Putin for an immediate ceasefire. This was reported by a French publication citing the Élysée Palace. And the President of France confirmed France's unwavering commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Let me remind you that the last time Putin spoke on the phone with Macron was on September 11, 2022. At that time, the conversation took place at the initiative of the French side, and during the talks, as reported by the Kremlin, there was a detailed and frank exchange of views on the situation in Ukraine, with a focus on issues of ensuring the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The heads of state also touched upon the issue of global food security. In particular, Putin confirmed Moscow's position that the grain exported from Black Sea ports should primarily be directed to the needs of developing countries. And after today's conversation between Putin and Macron, the president of France called his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. The details of the conversation between the French and Ukrainian leaders are not yet known, but it is reported that it was constructive. Macron told Zelensky about his conversation with Putin. And this is where things get really interesting. It seems that it was Putin who initiated this conversation, and not without reason. Notice how the Kremlin highlights the topic of Iran and the Middle East in its press release. The fact is that the French president has a rather cold stance towards Israel. By the way, he still hasn't supported or condemned the Israeli and American strikes on Iran. In short, he avoids getting involved. Moreover, let me remind you that after the summit, Macron insisted that it was necessary to simply announce a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, regardless of whether Israel's objectives were achieved or not. In other words, his position is rather slippery, I would say. Meanwhile, Putin is actually losing influence in the Middle East, and his alliance with Iran is falling apart. Let me remind you, Trump has already said that when Putin offered him help in negotiations with Tehran, the American president basically replied, "Help yourself first, and as for the Middle East, we'll manage there without your unwashed mug." But there is another reason for real panic in the Kremlin. I've already told you that, according to the nuclear deal from 2015, France and the United Kingdom, within the framework of the United Nations Security Council, have the right to unilaterally initiate the restoration of comprehensive sanctions against Iran at the United Nations level. And for this, which is very important, no vote is needed in the United Nations or in the Security Council as a whole. The British and the French have this right spelled out in the nuclear agreement with Iran, and Russia agreed to this right at the time. This right is valid until October of this year. So just think about it for a moment. Russia doesn't have the slightest say in what will happen next with Iran. It won't be able to veto block decisions in the United Nations Security Council or do anything there. That's why it's possible that Putin asked Macron to leave him at least a little bit of space in the Middle East. On the other hand, of course, Putin is painfully interested in Ukraine. And here, don't be quick to label Macron a traitor. Macron may have sensed a certain pause in the peace process. And with this conversation with the dictator, he creates an informational pretext to present himself not only as a partner of Ukraine, but also as a politician who is ready for complex diplomacy. And by the way, there is nothing wrong with that. It's a way, first of all, by the way, to show Donald Trump and part of French society that Macron is not belligerent, that he is a supporter of the peace process. The topic of Iran, by the way, is also important in this context. Macron is viewed as a peacemaker by voters, willing to negotiate with anyone for the sake of peace. That's his stance. For Ukraine, by the way, there is a benefit in this dialogue between Macron and Putin. This is yet another confirmation of the Kremlin's unwillingness to compromise. That is, Putin is once again demonstrating his traditional position. He doesn't want to negotiate right now. Right now, European leaders need to apply pressure carefully and delicately to convince Donald Trump that simply persuading Putin will not yield any results. Putin is not ready for a ceasefire, so he needs to be pressured. And note that Trump's team is convincing Europeans that it makes sense to talk to Putin. Listen, there's no need to crush him with sanctions yet. It's worth talking to him. Let's discuss and see if we can reach an agreement. And now Macron can confidently tell Donald Trump's team that he tried, just like they did. He talked to him. And now it's doubly clear that Putin isn't ready for any kind of dialogue. That means we need to increase the pressure. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments. Write in the comments. What do you think? Was it worth it for Macron to talk to Putin at all or not? Subscribe, hit the bell, and like the video. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.